Martha Drake from the Petoskey area. She's been active with the Public Service Commission concerning power in the state of Michigan. And Kay Hafner from the Kalamazoo area, who's been active with Palisades Watch, watching what's going on with the high-level nuclear waste over there. I've been involved with nuclear issues for about 10 years. And it seems to me that the important thing for the opposition to do is to control the equation of what are the real costs involved with nuclear power. The industry has an equation, but they leave a lot of variables out of the equation, and they don't want to discuss those. So what I'm hoping to do today is to talk about some of the things that are omitted by the industry and what the true overall cost of nuclear power is. Full cost accounting, if you will. And I would like to then now turn it over to Martha to talk about the economics of nuclear power.
Yeah. We all know nuclear power is far from cheap. I serve on a panel, advisory panel for Duke Power Company down in North Carolina and South Carolina on energy conservation. And in the course of our discussions there, they say that nuclear power has to be 60% cheaper than it is now in order to be competitive. That would be against coal plants. So that that's a flat statement that anybody can quote. That it has to be at least 60% cheaper. One of the things that they're discussing a lot is externalities, the costs that are not part of the internal costs of producing power, costs like environmental concerns, and of course the costs of subsidies is one of the big costs of externalities. The utility doesn't consider that at all. And many, not many, but some states now are making them add the cost of externalities when they make the decision of whether they will use gas, coal, oil, nuclear, or conservation. Richard Ottinger, who was a representative in the federal government, has done a lot of work on it, and I have copies of his work if anyone's interested. But if they add these externalities, now just the one for nuclear power is about 3 cents, and that's not including their subsidies. And the figure that I got from Nuclear Information was that the $111 billion has gone into subsidizing nuclear power. So obviously it's far from economical, and I believe the utilities are real aware of that at this point as far as building any more plants. They won't touch them unless they're heavily subsidized by the federal government. Because it's definitely more expensive. Another thing that is happening too is restructuring rates so that the utilities make more money if they help people conserve than they do from selling power. A man by the name of David, who was chairman of the Maine Public Service Commission, has written a book on it, which will be out very soon now. And there's a lot of different ways that they're trying to do this. One would be that they put a certain amount of money in the rate base, the Public Service Commission would be for the number of customers you serve. Then if you could take that money, if you can get the service to them more cheaply by relighting their light bulbs or putting jackets on their hot water heaters or all those things, why the utility can save their money. It's kind of like the HMO finance for health insurance, that concept, which is kind of exciting. But anyway, the Public Service Commission in Michigan, which I incidentally think is doing a real good job, has asked Detroit Edison and Consumers Power to suggest a plan where they would decouple the profits from the sales, and where the utility would make more money by helping their customers save than they are making by running their plants. So those will be coming before their public service commissions for their approval real soon. Okay.
Well, there's all kinds of costs that come with nuclear. One of the biggest is that they release a lot of radionuclides into the air and into the water, and nobody's really monitoring them. They're monitoring themselves, basically. I think every 4 years the state monitors drinking water in some big cities, but not all, certainly. And they do monitor milk. However, it's real interesting that the state of Michigan has said about the figures for the milk that they have themselves said, the Michigan Department of Public Health has said, this is very strange, that there's no increase in the counties where the reactors sit. And they themselves are questioning on these statistics. Monitoring is done very, very haphazardly at nuclear power plants. The state of Illinois has got state-of-the-art monitoring where they actually can tell what's coming out of the stack, and they don't have to have their monitors on all the time. They just do sample monitoring. And sample monitoring is not monitoring, because that means that when you're not sampling, stuff can escape and people never know it. A lot of the things that they release out of the nuclear power plants, many of the radionuclides concentrate in the food chain. They concentrate tens of thousands of times down low in the food chain. Some of them hundreds of thousands of times down low in the food chain. And that means when they get to people or birds, anything that's top of the food chain, they're concentrating millions of times. And for those that concentrate, the people that are exposed, or the birds or animals that are exposed to that, that means dead babies and birth defects when you're concentrating things that are millions of times that are real toxic to these beings. They're looking real closely now. Audubon and other groups are looking real closely now at the birth defects that are coming out of the Great Lakes, especially in the waterfowl, in terns and cormorants. Birds that are top of the food chain. Well, we also have a lot of birth defects in the top of the food chain with human beings. And in Europe, they've done a lot of study with the damage that has been done to trees and plankton, to the whole ecosystem. They say that it undermines immune systems of trees and plankton, as well as human beings, as well as it is birds and animals. So there's a lot of things. Big rock is notoriously bad because of the huge releases that were released up here. One of the bigger ones was xenon-135, which is a noble gas. The utilities routinely say, well, noble gases are nothing. They're inert, they don't react with anything, and they have short half-lives, and that's it. But unfortunately, these turn into other things. Most of them do. Xenon-135 turns into cesium-135, which is water soluble, immediately gets into the food chain if it's released, and has a half-life of 3 million years. So we're going to be just accumulating it for a long, long time. There's a lot, and right now one of the things they're fighting in Ann Arbor is the incinerator at the university, and they incinerate animal carcasses that have been contaminated with nuclear from testing, from research. And as a result, they get a lot of iodine coming out of the stack. They can't trap it. There's a lot of things, when you're burning nuclear, there's a lot of things you can't trap in the stack. Tritium is one of them, goes right through, and carbon-14 is another one. And they use a lot of carbon-14 in the animal experiments. And so it seems like there's maybe 20,000 people that live right around that incinerator. I have not worked on the incinerator, so I don't really know, but there's a lot of married students living there. Married housing is within a real short distance. So you're talking about a lot of radioactive iodine going out of there, and it could be affecting babies, and it could be affecting the other people who live there. There's a lot of health costs to consider, not just with birth defects. The states of Massachusetts and Maine have both done studies around nuclear power plants, Massachusetts around Pilgrim and Maine around Maine Yankee, and showed huge amounts of, well, not huge amounts, but large amounts of cancers and leukemias among adults downwind of those plants. There have been several studies done that have shown problems with birth defects and especially low birth weight babies. Rosalie Bertel did a study around a Wisconsin plant that had no apparent problems and showed high infant death rate and high low birth weight babies. There was a study done around Dresden in Chicago that showed the very same thing. There was a study done, a tri-state study. Do you remember? No.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it was done around 3 states out east. And I think Maryland was one of those states. It was right around Maryland, the 3 states right around there, and showed the very same thing: high infant death rate, high low birth weight babies. So something to consider. The class says that 60% of all the babies that die in Maryland today die from nuclear power. And certainly with the amount of birth defects that we have here in the state of Michigan, these should be alarm signs, and people should be looking at what's going on in their hometowns, looking for epidemiological numbers, and questioning and saying, what's going on here, and getting some good epidemiological studies going. Asking their legislators to do some studies when they live around nuclear power plants and see some high cancer rates, some high infant death rates, this kind of thing. We don't have them, and in the state, we haven't had very much epidemiological studies done. There's been some stuff done up by Big Rock, but it'd be good to have some people come in and do some state-of-the-art stuff. The cost that we have is that for 40 to 60 years of electricity, we have condemned every single generation following us to packaging this waste and repackaging when it leaks. And the other cost is if it leaks and they don't catch it, then they suffer with the health consequences. And the health consequences are big. We also live in the Great Lakes, 1/5 of the world's fresh water. And it's contaminated pretty badly now, but we really have an obligation to see that it's not contaminated more. It's very precious and fragile ecosystem. Lake Michigan has a clearing time of, they think, 100 years. They're not sure. And it's the most contaminated of the Great Lakes in that sense, because it doesn't have a clearing time that happens very regularly. Across Milwaukee, there's a ridge that goes across Milwaukee, across the entire lake, that traps toxins in the Chicago Basin. We have over 9 nuclear power plants that sit right on Lake Michigan and dump a lot into those lakes. And they don't just dump nuclear, they also dump a lot of chemicals. And they also dump a lot of heat, the environmental costs of heat. They kill a lot of fish down by Cook Nuclear Power Plant. They kill a lot of fish and birds that don't leave when it's their time to leave, because in the wintertime there's warm water there, so they stay. And then suddenly the plant shuts down to do repairs, and the warm water's gone, and the fish all die, or the birds all die. They're also, because of this new little critter, the zebra mussel. Zebra mussel has moved in, and we thought that the zebra mussel was a gift, from Europe, that they were going to close down all the nuclear power plants. They tried hard. In Monroe, they shut down the what?
The coal burner.
The coal burner. The intake. So, but unfortunately, they're pouring lots of chlorine. Chlorine apparently kills these animals. And so it doesn't do a real good job on them, but it kills some of them. And so they're using chlorine, and they're dumping massive amounts of chlorine into the lakes. Not only with the nuclear power plants, but where there's no water intake, because they clog up the pipes. So the wastes that are generated, they don't take whole cost accounting into effect. They look at the nuclear power plant, and that's it. But you have to look at the whole nuclear fuel cycle. And the whole nuclear fuel cycle makes a lot of contamination, not just with nuclear, but also with sulfur dioxides that are pouring into the air, also with carbon dioxide that are pouring into the air. There were 3 studies done, among them one by the Department of Energy, that showed that nuclear power plants, if you look at the whole nuclear fuel cycle, put more carbon dioxide into the air than do coal-fired plants. And, oh no, I'm sorry, I take that back. It wasn't coal-fired plants, it was then renewables. So the fact that the nuclear power plants say that this is a clean process, that it doesn't put carbon dioxide up there, it doesn't put sulfur dioxides up there, these studies show that that was not true.
Yeah, there's one figure on that. For each dollar spent on renewables, on saving energy, you get 7 times as much control of carbon dioxide as you do with the same dollar spent on nuclear power. So that energy conservation is 7 times more effective in controlling CO2 than nuclear is.
And the costs are not passed on. The government subsidies, the fuel enrichment programs and the milling and the mining, those costs are not passed on to the nuclear power plants. The government wraps up most of those because they don't want people to know how expensive nuclear is. And the costs of decommissioning have not even been figured yet. With Yankee Row, the costs of decommissioning were twice as much as they had originally figured. And because of that, they now figure that rates are going to go up pretty darn high where there's nuclear power plants. Interestingly enough, cities of Charlevoix, Harbor Springs, and Petoskey all just broke rank with Consumers Power as of July 1st. Before then, they were getting their power from Consumers Power, and now they've quit. And my guess is that they saw what was happening with Yankee Row and the decommissioning. They see that Big Rock is going to be decommissioned soon, and they don't want to pay those costs. And that's my guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I've lived there too, and I don't know exactly why they did, but the figure that I used in some testimony was that those cities were paying 4.5 cents, paying 3.5 cents for the power, but it was costing Consumers Power, according to their own figures, 4.5 cents to produce power, Big Rock. So they were losing a cent on every kilowatt hour they sold in cities.
Amory 11 says that if we utilized energy efficient lighting and motors and appliances, that we could shut every single nuclear power plant that there is here. And then if we went to solar and wind, we could, shut down some of the coal plants and some of, the other big polluters. So maybe we want to open it to questions.
One thing is that Amory Levin's worked closely with Bill Clinton or 10 years or something like that, yes.
Is there anything that you wanted to add?
Well, the insurance for the industry called Price-Anderson Act. If there's an accident, the utility doesn't have to. In Monroe, there was nationally the NRC study, a Sandia Labs study on plant by plant, what would be the property damage, deaths, and that type of thing. In Monroe, the property damage would be $136 billion if there was a worst case accident. This is $1980. Under the Price-Anderson Act, there would be insurance for $7 billion, and the utility would pay into that, and all the utilities in the nation would pay into that. But essentially, they're operating without insurance, and this is a tremendous subsidy to the industry. And when we start to look at all these subsidies that taxpayers are providing to the industry, you start to see the real cost involved. Genetic damage. I was at a presentation by Dr. Drake, and he put charts up showing the genetic damage that was occurring. What we're seeing now in this generation is just the tip of the iceberg, because the genetic damage is within our gene pool already. And the more and more of this stuff we produce, I mean, that's the higher up this curve goes. So we're going to see more and more genetic damage occurring. The genetic damage has already occurred, but we're going to see more of its manifestation as we move in through our generations.
So these are some more of the costs involved.
One cost that is never figured in is all the costs that would be there if they really built these plants to specification. For instance, when they were building Midland, they hired welders who weren't welders, so they didn't have to pay them like they would pay a true welder. And of course, they had bad welds. And this has happened across the board. They have they've just short-sheeted the industry, so to speak. There's a lot of costs that they just nip and tuck on and don't really spend the money that they should, and so their safety systems aren't adequate. Maybe you have some examples.
Well, there's use of counterfeit parts and materials that were sold essentially bill of goods. Just a national scandal just now breaking is on a product called Thermolag. This is a material that was supposed to be placed in nuclear plants as a fire barrier. Well, it turns out the stuff is highly combustible and actually adds to the fire and also releases hydrogen cyanide as it burns. Now, the reason this is real important, at nuclear power plants, if there's a fire and you start to lose electrical equipment and your cables start to burn up, you're losing your backup systems and your primary systems. There was a fire at Browns Ferry in 1975, which went on for 6.5 hours, and the plant was essentially out of control for 16 hours. Now, I got word that this material is in place at Fermi extensively, at the Fermi nuclear power plant in Monroe. Where else is this stuff? There's some 87 plants in the nation that it's installed at, and to what degree? Where is it being used? So this was counterfeit parts and materials that have been used in the industry. I grew up in Monroe, and I've been opposing the Fermi plant for over 10 years now. And talking to a lot of workers, there's concern that, well, you're taking away our jobs. But a nice little book done by Richard Grossman talks about energy jobs in the economy. And although at the height of construction of a nuclear power plant, there may be 5,000 to 7,000 people employed there, in fact, it is very capital intensive, tying up a lot of capital and providing not really that many jobs. If you were going to take, Fermi plant is over $6 billion now. If you take that $6 billion and put it into alternative energies, which tend to be labor intensive, there would have been a whole lot more jobs. So we're not saying we want to put people out of work. We want to put people to work. We don't want people to freeze in the dark. There are lots of alternative ways to do it, and this whole energy fair is about that. There's different ways to do it, and I think when you look at the equation, what the industry wants to include on their costs, what they want to say nuclear power costs, and you start to look at the other costs of health, environment, birth defects, genetic damage, the social implications, the different types of pollution, you see that the scale starts to tip way over, and the costs are exorbitant. And so we need to not just phase out nuclear power. We need an accelerated phase out of nuclear power. We need a shutdown of nuclear power, and to develop and put our R&D into alternative energies. If the panel doesn't have anything else, it's probably time.
Just one other thing. For example, this high-level waste that's going to be stored at Palisades Nuclear Power Plant in Point Beach, there's a cast that's going to be used at both of those, Point Beach and Wisconsin, the nuclear power plant there. The cast that's going to be used there was never tested. This saves the industry a lot of money. So, anyway, yeah, we can open it for questions.
Yeah, I'd like to pass around these figures that I have on congressional appropriations. Shows how much more goes for nuclear power than for fossil, and I have photovoltaics on that. One insight I got from this panel that I'm on with Duke Power, one of the executives of Duke Power, talking about that solar power was down to 13 cents. It was his figure that solar power was down to 13 cents a kilowatt hour now, and he said we're paying that much for emergency power on our peak when we have to buy power. So that actually it has come together, the cost of solar power and for emergency purchase power.
Well, can we open it up some and take some questions or comments?
Well, study's been done at all about the, downwind effects of that plant there?
Yes, I did a amateurish one years ago, and I thought I found a 5% increase. The Department of Health did one, and they eliminate the worst year and the best year. And with such small figures, eliminating the worst year changed the figures a lot, and they didn't find any increase. And then fairly recently, there's been a national study around all the nuclear plants, and they don't find an increase, but they use such a big group, big area, like they used all of 2 counties, I believe, for Big Rock, and that's quite different than just using a 2 or 3 mile radius, something like that. So.
Yeah, the national study was just laced with methodological flaws. They didn't look at the downwind. They would look at the upwind and trying to water down the population. So there were lots of problems with that national study.